Nobody in that room was prepared to hear your name. The family had already celebrated their victory in silence. They believed your soulmate had finally surrendered to their pressure. They believed you had been removed from the story forever. But they were wrong. Because when your soulmate was finally asked to choose, they didn't hesitate. They looked directly at the people who had been controlling this decision for months, and said your name. Listen carefully, because what happened immediately afterward was even more shocking than the choice itself. For months, your soulmate had been carrying a battle nobody could see. On the outside, they appeared calm. They attended family conversations. They listened to advice. They nodded when people told them it was time to forget you and build a different future. But behind closed doors, everything was different. Your name was still sitting inside their heart like an unfinished sentence. They could silence conversations about you. They could hide old memories. They could pretend they had accepted the separation. But they could not force themselves to stop loving you. And the family never understood that. They mistook silence for surrender. They thought your soulmate had finally chosen loyalty to them over love for you. So they arranged one final family meeting. Everyone important was there. Your soulmate's mother sat quietly near the end of the table. Another relative had already prepared documents connected to the future they wanted your soulmate to accept. Someone had even begun discussing dates and plans as though the decision had already been made. Your soulmate walked into that room knowing exactly what everyone expected. And for several minutes, they said almost nothing. One family member finally leaned forward and asked the question everyone had been waiting to hear. Are you ready to leave all of this behind and choose the future your family wants? Your soulmate looked down. The room became silent. Someone smiled because they believed the answer was obvious. Then your soulmate raised their eyes. No. That single word destroyed every expectation in the room. Someone immediately asked, "Then who are you choosing?" Your soulmate didn't need another second. They said your name. Everything stopped. One relative stared at them in disbelief. Another immediately stood up. Someone whispered that this couldn't be happening. But your soulmate remained completely still. For the first time, they were no longer afraid of disappointing everyone else. They were more afraid of losing you forever. And then they said something that made the room even quieter. I already lost enough time listening to everyone except my own heart. Those words hit differently. Because certain people in that room knew exactly what your soulmate meant. They knew there had been interference. They knew opinions had become pressure. They knew things had been said about you that your soulmate had once believed. And now your soulmate was beginning to question everything. But don't skip this, because this is where the entire situation took a turn nobody expected. Your soulmate reached into their pocket and placed their phone on the table. There was a message open on the screen. A message connected to you. They had received it only hours before the meeting. And whatever was inside that message had apparently confirmed something your soulmate had suspected for a very long time. They looked toward one particular family member and asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me the truth about this?" Nobody answered. Your soulmate asked again. This time their voice was stronger. "Why did you let me believe something about them that wasn't true?" The person across the table suddenly looked nervous. And that reaction told your soulmate everything. This wasn't just about choosing you anymore. This was about discovering whether the separation itself had been built on a lie. Your soulmate turned toward their mother. "Did you know?" She couldn't answer immediately. Her eyes filled with tears. And that silence hurt your soulmate more than any confession could have, because now pieces of the past were beginning to connect. The strange conversations. The warnings. The pressure to stay away from you. The things your soulmate had been told at exactly the moment your relationship was most vulnerable. For years, they believed losing you was simply something that happened. Now they were wondering whether someone had helped make it happen. Your soulmate stood up. Someone tried to stop them. Think about what you're doing. You could destroy everything. Your soulmate turned around. No. I'm finally fixing what was destroyed. Nobody expected that answer. Then came the shocking decision. Your soulmate announced that they were refusing every plan the family had made for their future. No more pretending. No more choosing a life simply because everyone else approved of it. No more allowing other people to decide who deserved their heart. They were going to find you. Not someday. Not after another family discussion. They wanted to do it now. Someone immediately warned them that you might have moved on. Your soulmate paused. That possibility clearly hurt. But then they said, "If they have, I'll respect it. But they deserve to hear the truth from me." And that was the moment the argument stopped being about winning you back. It became about finally giving you something you should have received a long time ago. The truth. Your soulmate admitted that they owed you an explanation. An apology. And one honest conversation without anyone standing between you, but one person in that room still wasn't ready to let that happen. They suddenly said, "If you go to them, there's something else you need to know first." Your soulmate froze. Everyone turned toward that person. Your soulmate slowly asked, "What else?" The answer didn't come immediately. Instead, the person walked toward a cabinet and removed an old envelope. Your name was written across the front. Your soulmate recognized the handwriting. And their face changed instantly. Because that envelope had apparently been kept from them for years. Your soulmate asked where it came from. Nobody wanted to answer. Finally, their mother whispered, "It arrived after you two separated." Your soulmate stared at her. "You had something from them all this time?" Tears began falling down her face. She nodded. Your soulmate opened the envelope with shaking hands. And suddenly the anger disappeared from their face. It was replaced by heartbreak. Because whatever you had written inside proved one devastating thing. You had not disappeared without caring. You had tried to reach them. You had tried to explain, and someone had made sure your soulmate never received the truth. Your soulmate sat down again. Not because they had changed their decision. Because now their decision had become even stronger. They looked around the room and said, "You all wanted me to choose between my family and the person I love. But that was never the real choice." Nobody spoke. The real choice was between continuing to live inside someone else's version of my life, or finally finding out the truth for myself. And they chose the truth. They chose the conversation that should have happened years ago. They chose to stop allowing fear to make decisions for them. And above everything else, they chose to say your name when everyone expected them to erase it. But there was still one question your soulmate couldn't answer. After everything that happened, after all that lost time, after all the silence, would you even want to hear from them? That question followed them as they walked out of the room. Their phone was already in their hand. Your contact was open. Their finger hovered over your name. For several seconds, they couldn't move. Then they remembered the envelope. They remembered everything they had just discovered. And they finally understood something they should have understood much earlier. Sometimes the most painful regret isn't choosing the wrong person. It's allowing other people to convince you not to choose the person your heart never stopped choosing. Your soulmate took one final look back at the family. Nobody tried to stop them this time. Then they turned toward the door. And just before leaving, they made one promise. "I don't know what happens after I speak to them. But this time, nobody else is going to speak for me." Then the door closed. And your soulmate looked at your name glowing on their phone. This time, they pressed it, the call connected. And for one terrifying second, your soulmate forgot every word they had planned to say. Their heart was pounding because this was no longer a family argument, an old envelope, or a memory they could hide from. This was you. The person whose name they had just defended in front of everyone. The person they had spent years trying unsuccessfully to forget. And now, after everything that had been uncovered, your soulmate was finally standing at the edge of the conversation that could change both of your lives. The first ring passed. Then the second. By the third, your soulmate almost convinced themselves you weren't going to answer. But suddenly the ringing stopped. Silence. Your soulmate's breathing changed. They knew someone was there. For a moment, neither side said anything. Then your soulmate whispered your name. Not dramatically. Not confidently. But with so much emotion that years of regret seemed trapped inside those few seconds. "I know I may be the last person you wanted to hear from." Their voice started breaking. "But I found something today that I should have seen years ago. They looked down at the old envelope still clutched tightly in their hand. "I found what you sent me." Another silence followed. And that silence terrified them. Because now your soulmate understood that while they had spent years believing you walked away, you may have spent those same years believing they deliberately ignored you. Two people carrying completely different versions of the same heartbreak. And someone else had known the truth. Your soulmate closed their eyes. "I need you to know something. I never received this." Their voice became stronger. "I never knew," you tried to explain. They paused before saying the next words. "And if I had known, everything might have been different." Those words were painful because your soulmate knew they couldn't return the lost years. They couldn't undo the nights you may have wondered why they never answered. They couldn't erase the decisions that followed. But they could finally stop allowing a lie to control what happened next. Then something unexpected happened. Your soulmate heard something from the other side of the call that made them sit completely still. Their expression changed. Because apparently there hadn't been only one attempt to reach them. There had been another. And another. Your soulmate slowly asked, "What do you mean?" What they heard next made their stomach drop. The envelope wasn't the entire story. There had been messages. There had been calls. There had even been one final attempt to meet face to face. But somehow, every road between the two of you had been closed. Every single one. Your soulmate stood up immediately. Now the heartbreak was turning into anger. Not anger toward you. Anger at the realization that the separation they had accepted as fate may never have been fate at all. Who stopped you? The answer made them freeze. Because it was someone they trusted. Someone who had been sitting inside that family meeting. Someone who had looked directly into your soulmate's eyes for years and allowed them to believe you had simply stopped fighting for the relationship. Your soulmate's hand began shaking. Suddenly every strange memory made sense. Every warning. Every convenient misunderstanding, every moment when they were told, "Don't contact them." Every time someone insisted you had already moved on. It had all pushed them in one direction. Away from you. But don't skip what happened next, because your soulmate did something nobody in the family expected them to do. They turned around. They went straight back toward that room. The family members who thought the confrontation was over suddenly saw your soulmate return through the doorway. But this time their expression was completely different. They weren't confused anymore. They weren't asking permission. They wanted answers. Your soulmate placed the phone on the table. Then they looked directly at the person whose name had just come up during the call. "Tell me the truth." Nobody moved. The person tried to avoid the question. Your soulmate didn't allow it. "Did you stop them from reaching me?" The room became painfully quiet. Someone tried to interrupt, but your soulmate raised their hand. "No. Nobody speaks for them. Nobody speaks for me. Not anymore. Then they asked the question again. Did you stop you from reaching me? The person's face told the truth before their mouth did. Your soulmate saw it immediately. And something inside them broke. Not because they suddenly stopped loving their family, but because they finally understood how expensive their silence had been. Years, memories, trust, a future that might have looked completely different. The person finally admitted that they had interfered. They claimed they were protecting your soulmate. They said they believed you weren't right for them. They said they thought the relationship would eventually hurt everyone. But your soulmate interrupted. You didn't protect me. Their eyes filled with tears. You made a decision that belonged to me. Nobody could argue with that. Then your soulmate said the sentence that changed the entire room. And I will not let you make another one. They picked up the phone again. The call was still connected. Your soulmate walked outside. This time, they didn't care who followed. They didn't care who disagreed. Because something had become painfully clear. Choosing you in that room had only been the beginning. Now they had to prove that choice with action. Your soulmate spoke into the phone again. I'm not asking you to forget what happened. They swallowed hard. I'm not even asking you to trust me immediately. Then came the words they had been afraid to say for years. I'm asking for one chance to hear everything I should have heard from you back then. Your soulmate waited. Their entire future seemed to hang inside that silence. And then came a response they never expected. Not a promise. Not forgiveness. Something much more powerful. A question. A question that forced your soulmate to confront the one truth they had still been avoiding. Because before you could decide whether to open that door again, you needed to know why your soulmate had stopped fighting for you in the first place. And this time, there was nowhere left for them to hide. Your soulmate went completely silent. Because the question coming from you was simple. But answering it meant admitting something they had been ashamed to face for years. Why did you believe them instead of believing in us? Those words hit harder than every argument inside that family room. Your soulmate lowered their eyes. For years, they had blamed circumstances, timing, distance, family pressure, and misunderstandings. But now they finally understood that none of those explanations could erase one painful fact. When your relationship needed courage the most, they had allowed fear to become louder than love. I was scared. The confession came quietly. I was scared of losing my family. Scared they might be right. Scared that if I chose you and everything fell apart, I would lose everyone. They paused. But I never understood that by trying not to lose everyone, I lost the one person I never wanted to lose. You. There was no dramatic excuse after that. No attempt to rewrite history. Your soulmate knew an apology couldn't return the missing years. So instead of asking you to immediately forgive them, they finally gave you something much more important. The truth. They admitted how many nights they had thought about contacting you. How many times they had typed your name into their phone and stopped. How often they had wondered whether you hated them. And how every attempt to build a future without you eventually led back to the same unanswered question. What if they had fought harder? But don't skip this moment, because what you said next completely changed the conversation. You revealed that there had been one specific day when you almost gave up waiting forever. One day when you had made a final attempt to reach them. Your soulmate immediately remembered that date. Their face changed. Because something unusual had happened that exact same day. A family member had suddenly taken their phone and insisted there was an emergency. Later that evening, your soulmate had been told that you wanted no further contact. At the time, they believed it. Now they understood exactly what may have happened. Your soulmate turned back toward the house. The person who had admitted interfering was still inside. But now there was another question. A much bigger one. Your soulmate walked back into the room and asked, "What happened to my phone that day?" Nobody answered. They repeated the date. Suddenly, their mother covered her mouth. Your soulmate noticed immediately. You remember. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. And then another truth came out. There had been a message from you. A message your soulmate never saw. Someone had deleted it. The entire room erupted. One person began defending what happened. Another insisted they had only been trying to prevent more pain. But your soulmate wasn't listening anymore. Because one thought had taken over their mind. What did that message say? They turned back toward the phone. You were still there. And when your soulmate asked about that final message, the answer nearly broke them. Because it wasn't an angry goodbye. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't you telling them you had stopped loving them. It was a request. One final request to meet. You had wanted only one conversation before walking away. And your soulmate never came. Now they understood what that silence must have looked like from your side. You believed they had made their choice. Your soulmate believed you had made yours. And between those two beliefs stood someone else's interference. Your soulmate sat down, overwhelmed. Then they whispered, "You waited for me?" The answer was enough. Their eyes filled with tears. For the first time, the lost years weren't an abstract regret anymore. They could picture that moment. You waiting. You checking the time. You hoping they would appear. And your soulmate somewhere else, completely unaware that the most important person in their life was waiting for an answer. Something changed inside them. They stood again and faced the entire family. No more secrets. Someone tried to calm them. Your soulmate refused. If there is anything else connected to us, anything you kept from me, anything they sent, anything you know. Bring it out now." Nobody moved. Then, from the back of the room, the oldest member of the family slowly stood. They had barely spoken all evening. But now they looked toward your soulmate and said, "There is something else." The room went silent again. Your soulmate stared at them. "What?" The older relative walked toward another room. When they returned, they were carrying a small box. It looked old. Dust had collected around its edges. Your soulmate recognized it immediately. It had belonged to someone in the family who had passed away years earlier. The box was placed carefully on the table. "There's something inside that was supposed to reach you." Your soulmate's hands began trembling. "From who?" The relative looked at the phone. Then back at your soulmate. "From them." Your name was written beneath the lid. Your soulmate couldn't move. Another hidden piece of your story had been sitting inside their own family home all these years. They slowly opened the box. Inside were several things. An old photograph, a folded note, and one sealed envelope. But the envelope wasn't addressed to your soulmate. It was addressed to you. That changed everything. Because suddenly your soulmate realized this secret wasn't only about what had been hidden from them. Someone in their family had once intended to tell you something too. Your soulmate picked up the envelope. They asked who had written it. The answer made their face turn pale, because the person who wrote that letter had known the truth about your separation from the very beginning. And according to the older relative, that letter contained the one confession nobody in the family had ever wanted you to read. Your soulmate looked at the sealed envelope, then at the family, then back toward the phone. For the first time that night, even the person who had admitted interfering looked frightened. Your soulmate immediately understood why. Whatever was inside that envelope could expose far more than a deleted message. It could reveal exactly how the two of you were separated, who started it, and why someone had been so determined to keep you apart. Your soulmate held the envelope tightly and said, "This belongs to them." Then they made another decision nobody could stop. They were going to bring it to you personally. And this time, the entire truth was coming with them. Your soulmate didn't wait for another explanation. They walked out carrying the sealed envelope, the old photograph, and a truth that had already destroyed everything they once believed about your separation. But something was different now. For years, whenever your name came up, they had hesitated. Tonight, there was no hesitation left. They weren't coming to convince you to forget the past. They weren't coming to demand another chance. They were coming because you deserved to finally hold the truth in your own hands. Before leaving, your soulmate looked back at the family and said, "Whatever happens after tonight, it will finally be our decision." Nobody answered, because everyone understood what those words meant. The family had lost control of the story. Your soulmate stepped outside and spoke into the phone. am coming to you." There was a pause. Then they added, "I have something that belongs to you. And I think you should be the one who opens it." Their hands were trembling. Not because they were afraid of the letter. They were afraid of what would happen when they finally stood in front of you again. Would you close the door? Would you listen? Would years of pain be too heavy to overcome? Your soulmate didn't know. But for the first time, uncertainty wasn't enough to make them run away. They had already spent too many years doing that. The journey toward you felt longer than it really was. Every memory returned. Your laughter. Your arguments. The plans you once made together. The last conversation before everything collapsed. And now your soulmate understood how many of those memories had been poisoned by information that wasn't even true. Then something happened that made them stop. Their phone buzzed. A message from the family. Do not give them that envelope until you know everything. Your soulmate stared at the screen. Seconds later, another message arrived. There is something inside that letter you still don't understand. For one moment, fear returned. The old version of your soulmate might have turned around. The old version might have allowed another warning to control their decision. Not tonight. They switched the phone to silent and kept moving toward you. Because this time, they understood the difference between protection and control. And they were finished confusing the two. Then came the moment they had imagined countless times. They saw you. Everything inside them stopped. All the speeches they had prepared disappeared. All the explanations suddenly felt too small. Because after years of wondering what it would feel like to stand in front of you again, there you were. Your soulmate couldn't speak immediately. They simply looked at you. And for several seconds, neither of you moved. Then your soulmate held out the envelope. This should have reached you years ago. You looked down at your name written across it. Your soulmate continued. I haven't opened it. Whatever is inside, we find out together. That mattered. Because for once, nobody else was deciding what you were allowed to know. You opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten confession. The first few lines were enough to change your soulmate's expression. The letter revealed that someone in the family had deliberately created the misunderstanding between you. But that wasn't the biggest revelation. The writer admitted why. They had believed your relationship was becoming too serious. They knew your soulmate was preparing to make a mature decision about their future. And they were terrified that if your soulmate chose you, they would walk away from the life the family had already planned for them. So they interfered. A message was hidden. Another was deleted. A meeting was prevented. Then both of you were separately told that the other person had chosen to walk away. Your soulmate covered their mouth. The truth was finally sitting between you. Neither of you had abandoned the other the way you had been made to believe. You had both been hurt by the same lie. But then you reached the final section of the letter. Your expression changed. Your soulmate noticed immediately. What does it say? You didn't answer at first. Because the final paragraph contained something nobody had mentioned. The person who wrote the confession claimed they had eventually regretted everything. Years later, they had tried to repair the damage. They had contacted someone close to your soulmate and asked them to reunite the two of you. But that person refused. Your soulmate stared at you. There had been a second person involved. Someone who knew the original interference was wrong, and still chose to keep you apart. Suddenly this wasn't an old mistake made by one frightened relative. Someone had actively protected the lie for years. Your soulmate took the letter and read the final lines again. Then they recognized the description. Their face went pale. Because they knew exactly who the letter was talking about. It was the same person who had sat quietly during the family meeting. The same person who had encouraged your soulmate to move on. The same person who had repeatedly insisted you no longer cared. And worst of all, the same person your soulmate had trusted with almost every major decision after losing you. Your soulmate looked at you. There were tears in their eyes, but their voice was steady. I can't change what they did. Then they stepped closer. And I can't ask you to erase what it cost you. A long silence followed. But I can promise you one thing. Your soulmate placed the letter between you. Nobody gets to decide our story again. They didn't ask you for an immediate answer. They didn't pressure you to forgive. Instead, they finally gave you the choice that other people had stolen years ago. If you want me to leave, I will. Their voice trembled. But if there is even one conversation left between us, I'm ready to tell you everything. And then you did something your soulmate wasn't prepared for. You reached for the old photograph they had brought from the box. You turned it over. There was writing on the back. A date. A place. And one short sentence neither of you had noticed before. Your soulmate read it once. Then again. Their eyes widened. Because that message suggested someone had known the two of you would eventually discover the truth. And beneath it was one final instruction. Ask what happened on this date. Your soulmate recognized the date immediately. It was 3 days before your relationship fell apart. They looked at you in complete disbelief. Because now they remembered exactly where they had been that night. And exactly who had been with them. The truth you had uncovered tonight was enormous. But suddenly both of you realized something chilling. It still wasn't the whole story. Your soulmate stared at that date until one buried memory suddenly came rushing back. 3 days before everything between you collapsed, they had been called into a private family conversation. At the time, it seemed ordinary. Tonight, they finally understood it had been the beginning of everything. They looked at you and said, I remember that night. Their voice had changed. There was no confusion anymore. There was certainty. That was the night they told me something about you that made me question everything. You froze. Your soulmate continued. They told me you had already made a decision about us. They said you were preparing to leave, and that you didn't have the courage to tell me yourself. But you knew immediately that wasn't true. You had been preparing for something completely different. Something your soulmate had never known. That night, you had been planning to ask them to meet because you wanted to make one serious promise about your future together. Your soulmate's eyes filled with disbelief. You were going to stay? Yes. And suddenly the entire story turned upside down. While your soulmate was being convinced that you were preparing to leave. You were preparing to fight for the relationship. Two completely opposite realities had been created on the exact same night. Your soulmate stepped back. For several seconds, they couldn't speak. Then the sadness on their face changed into determination. We're going back. You looked at them. To the family? They nodded. Tonight. Because there was one question that could no longer wait. Who created the first lie? And why were so many people willing to protect it afterward? Your soulmate didn't want another private explanation. This time, they wanted everyone in the same room. No separate stories. No whispered excuses. No opportunity for anyone to change their version later. When the two of you arrived together, the reaction was immediate. The room went silent. Nobody expected your soulmate to return. And absolutely nobody expected them to return with you standing beside them. One person looked away. Another immediately stood. But your soulmate walked straight to the table and placed the photograph and letter in front of everyone. Tonight this ends. Nobody interrupted. Your soulmate pointed toward the date written behind the photograph. Who told me they were leaving? Silence. They asked again. Who started it? Finally, someone spoke. But it wasn't the person either of you expected. Your soulmate's mother began crying. She slowly stood and admitted that she knew about the conversation. But she hadn't created the lie. She had believed it too. Then she pointed toward the person who had remained unusually quiet all evening. Every eye in the room turned. Your soulmate's face changed. Because this was someone they had defended for years. Someone they trusted completely. Someone who had comforted them after losing you. The person finally admitted the truth. They had started the rumor. They had convinced the family that your relationship was about to collapse anyway. Then they convinced your soulmate that you were leaving. But your soulmate immediately asked the question that mattered most. Why? The answer shocked everyone. It wasn't simply because they disliked you. It wasn't about family reputation. And it wasn't because they believed your soulmate deserved someone different. They were afraid. Afraid that if your soulmate chose you, your soulmate would leave the family's plans behind completely. There was money involved, responsibilities, expectations, a future that had been arranged long before you entered the picture. And you represented something they couldn't control. Choice. Your soulmate looked at them and whispered, "So you destroyed us because you were afraid I would choose my own life?" The person lowered their head. That silence was the confession. But your soulmate didn't scream. They didn't threaten anyone. Instead, they did something far more powerful. They reached for your hand. Right there. In front of everyone. And said, "Then watch me choose it now." Nobody moved. Your soulmate turned toward you. For the first time, there was no family member between you. No hidden message. No missing letter. No manipulated conversation. Just two people finally standing inside the same truth. Your soulmate looked directly into your eyes. "I chose your name earlier tonight when everyone expected me to choose them." They squeezed your hand. "But I need you to understand something. I'm not choosing you because I discovered they lied. I'm choosing honesty because I'm finished living according to fear. And if you decide there is still a place for me in your life, I will never again allow another person to speak for my heart." The room became completely silent. Then your soulmate did something even you didn't expect. They took the family documents that had been prepared for their future and pushed them back across the table. "I won't sign these." One relative immediately protested. Your soulmate remained calm. "My future is not a family vote." That sentence ended the argument. Because this was no longer the frightened person who had once allowed pressure to decide everything, this was someone finally willing to accept the consequences of their own choice. Then they turned toward you. And suddenly, after all the revelations, the biggest decision of the night belonged to you. Your soulmate didn't demand forgiveness. They didn't ask you to pretend the lost years never happened. They simply said, "I can't give those years back, but I can make sure the next decision is ours." You looked around the room. At the people who had once controlled the story. At the letter that finally exposed everything. At the photograph carrying the date that unlocked the truth. And finally, at the person who had said your name when the entire family expected them to choose everyone else. Your soulmate waited. Because this time they understood something they should have understood years ago. Real love cannot survive when one person controls the other person's choice. It survives when two people are finally allowed to make that choice for themselves. And whatever you decided next, your soulmate had already made one thing perfectly clear. They were done running. Done hiding. Done allowing fear to speak louder than their heart. Tonight, in front of the same family that expected your soulmate to erase you from their future, they said your name. They uncovered the truth. They rejected the future others had prepared for them. And then they walked toward you instead. But just as the room believed every secret had finally been exposed, your soulmate's mother suddenly reached for the old photograph. Her hands began trembling. She stared at the date again. Then she whispered, "Wait. There's one thing none of you know about that night." Your soulmate turned toward her. "What do you mean?" She looked directly at you. And the words she said next left everyone frozen. Because apparently, someone had come to that house 3 days before your separation. Someone carrying something meant specifically for you. And your soulmate had never been told they were there. Your soulmate's mother slowly opened a drawer and pulled out one final envelope. Nobody spoke. She placed it directly into your hands and whispered, "This should have been given to you years ago." Inside was the missing proof, the final piece showing that your separation had never happened because love disappeared. It happened because fear, pressure, and interference were allowed to speak louder than the two people actually living the story. Your soulmate looked at you with tears in their eyes. For years, they had wondered whether you stopped loving them. For years, you may have wondered exactly the same thing. And now both of you were standing face to face with the truth. Your soulmate stepped closer. "I cannot return the years we lost. I cannot erase what you went through. And I will never ask you to pretend none of it happened." Then their voice became stronger. "But I can make one decision today without fear, without pressure, and without anyone making it for me." They turned toward the entire family. Everyone was watching. The same people who had expected your soulmate to choose them were now about to hear the answer one final time. Your soulmate reached for your hand. "I choose the person whose name never truly left my heart." They looked directly at you. "I choose you." No one argued this time. No one interrupted. Because this wasn't an emotional reaction anymore. It was a decision. Your soulmate wasn't asking the family for permission to love you. They were finally taking responsibility for their own future. Then they turned back toward you. But what happens next belongs to both of us. That mattered more than everything else. Because after years of other people controlling the story, your soulmate finally gave you the freedom to decide too. No pressure. No promises demanded. No pretending the damage never happened. Just truth. Your soulmate held your hand and whispered, "If we begin again, we begin differently." No secrets. No outside voices deciding for us. No disappearing when things become difficult. Then came the words they had waited years to say. "This time, I fight for us." And in that moment, the family finally understood something they had refused to understand for years. They could separate two people. They could hide letters. They could create misunderstandings. They could delay the truth. But they could never completely erase what was real. Your soulmate had been given every reason to forget you. Instead, when the moment of choice finally arrived, they said your name. Not because the past was perfect. Not because the pain suddenly disappeared. But because after every secret was exposed and every lie finally collapsed, their hearts still returned to the same place. You. And perhaps the most shocking decision wasn't that your soulmate chose you in front of their family. It was what they decided afterward. They chose to stop living in the past. They chose to rebuild trust slowly. They chose to let actions become louder than promises. And they chose never again to let another person decide how your story should end. Because some love stories don't need the past rewritten. They need the truth revealed. They need two people brave enough to look at everything that went wrong and decide whether something beautiful can still be built from what remains. Your soulmate looked at you one final time and smiled through their tears. The family made their choice years ago. Then they gently squeezed your hand. Tonight, I made mine. And this time, your name was the answer.